Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1407. The topic is Q&A and the title is, when should I start seeing results? I think that's a great question. So hopefully it is, otherwise this isn't going to be a good podcast. But the idea for this podcast actually came from one of my clients. They're a business development client, so these are people I work with who are often personal trainers or they're wanting to become a personal trainer. So if they're already a personal trainer, they're going through some kind of transition and or they're wanting to grow their business. If they're new to personal training, they just kind of want to make sure they do it well and make a good amount of money. So I've been a personal trainer now for 20 years. That's crazy. I don't feel like I'm old enough to say that, but I've been a personal trainer for 20 years. I made and have owned and run Brutal Iron Gym now for 11 years, which is pretty awesome. So I've been very successful in business so far, knock on wood. But to be making a living doing personal training for 20 years, got to do something right. And to own a business for over 10 years, you got to do something right. So it's fun to be able to share some of the things I got right and then all the things I got wrong with other trainers. That way they can avoid those mistakes themselves. But I do love business development. I love consulting with trainers and gyms and things. It's a lot of fun. So this client, we meet every week. So business development clients, we do virtual consultations every week. And we often will discuss as much as we can in the consultation, and then in between then, we do kind of Q&A through an online document, and most of the trainers, I actually do their nutrition and training as a way for them to kind of learn new strategies, new techniques, and then also just take that burden off of them while they're trying to build their business and develop other things. So it's a cool opportunity for them to kind of reduce their stress a little bit, increase their learning a little bit. So really cool. So with this one, this client, one of the questions they had sent of things that we want to discuss at our next virtual consultation, or anything that we don't get to, I send extra information afterwards. So I'm making today's podcast as a way to answer these questions in case we don't get to those. And I thought they were good enough questions that other people might benefit from hearing them as well. So that's the point of all this. So now the questions they asked were, when should I start seeing results? Just curious how you would answer this question to a client who doesn't track their nutrition. And then also, when should I start seeing results? Just curious how you would answer this question to a client who says she's only eating 1,200 calories a day and working out like crazy. What is typically your process of working with clients who are weight loss resistant? Okay, this is a lot of fun. I really like this. Now, one of the things is like the term like weight loss resistant. I've heard that before. That doesn't exist. If somebody thinks they're weight loss resistant, it's most likely because they have an improper balance between their training and nutrition. If you get their training and nutrition correct, they'll see weight loss, fat loss. The things that could happen if that isn't the case, if their hormones are way out of whack, so their thyroid is non-existent, their, testosterone, estrogen, all that stuff is messed up. If they have some kind of, hormonal imbalance or things like that, they definitely should get that checked. So if somebody is having trouble losing body fat, so for example, we have podcast 1232 is a nutrition podcast titled Start Here. And the first thing I say in that podcast is to get your hormones checked. So if you've had struggles and you're like, man, I eat really healthy and I exercise all the time and I see nothing. And then here I am telling you, well, that just means you're not, exercising right and eating right. And you're like, screw you. Fair enough. So I would go get your hormones checked, make sure your thyroid's right. If any of that stuff's off, get it fixed or get it addressed. And then you would also want to look at your training and nutrition balance. There's no one that I've ever worked with in 3,000 plus clients, 20 years of doing this, that we weren't able to make progress once you balance the correct components of nutrition and training. So for example, if somebody's only eating 1,200 calories a day and they're working out like crazy, no kidding, they're not going to lose weight because their body's dying. They're basically trying to murder their body. So the body stops responding. It's not going to give up more body fat. Then all of a sudden you're left with no body fat. You miss 1 calorie of a meal and all of a sudden your organs shut down. So your body's not going to leave you with 0% body fat when you eat insufficiently and inconsistently. That's just understanding how the body works helps that seem even more obvious. Now, I have a history of eating disorder myself. I was anorexic for 2.5 years. I ate one meal a day and tried to exercise that thing off. So my goal every single day was to end at net 0 calories, which is bonkers unhealthy, crazy unhealthy. And surprisingly, for 2.5 years, I made absolutely no progress. What do you know? So I've been there myself. So I'm, sometimes my answers seem very quick and kind of jerkish, where you might not think that I'm considering all of your emotions and feelings. I do know, I have a good idea, or I have a way to relate to how you're feeling, if that makes more sense. It's just, since I've gone through it, I can now look back and say, dang, I wasted my time, and I'm encouraging you to not waste your time. But to that question of what is typically your process working with clients who are weight loss resistant, I don't treat anybody any differently based on, like, if they are like, well, I just haven't been able to lose weight, I haven't been able to lose weight, I haven't been able to lose weight. We go through exactly what I explained in podcast 1232. I have them go get their hormones checked. We start looking at calorie balance to activity level. We then set up protein. Like I tell you exactly the steps that I do with my clients in podcast 1232. It's that way you can do it with yourself. Now, I know as you go through that, there's going to be some complexities that if you're brand new to it, you might struggle with, and that's why we have all the other podcasts to support that. And then you can also just email me and I'll help you out as well. But let's get back to these questions of when should I start seeing results? And we want to look at that for somebody who doesn't track nutrition and somebody who is eating too little compared to their activity level. So for somebody who is not tracking the results, tracking their nutrition, let's say that their results are like what their goals are, is to lose some body fat, build some strength, and build some muscle. So everybody to some degree wants all those things. They might want a little more of one thing versus another thing. If somebody's already super lean, they want to just build strength and muscle. If somebody's super overweight, they probably don't really give a crap about strength and muscle. They just want to get the fat off. So some degree, everybody wants a little bit of these in some way. Now, why that's important is how your nutrition relates to these goals is a little bit different for each of these goals. But that's actually the first thing I would do with this client is if they asked me, when should I start seeing results? And I knew that they weren't tracking their nutrition, the first thing I would do is explain how food relates to each of their goals. So if their goal is fat loss, then I would explain how if they are inconsistently eating, they're actually reinforcing what body fat is for. And what I mean by that is body fat is just stored calories for when our body feels like it needs calories compared to, like, calories for energy compared to what it's intaking. So if I were to eat, say, 10 calories every minute, and my body used 10 calories every minute, and I did that every minute of every day always, my body would have very minimal body fat. You might have like 0.1% body fat. So what comes down to body fat is our body creates and stores energy to protect itself, protect its organs, and to operate itself and run so it doesn't die. Run everything, run all the processes. The more consistent we are with matching our caloric needs, the less the body needs body fat, and therefore it stops making it, and it lets it go ahead and kind of like be burned off and not replaced. So really, when we're looking at how do we lose body fat, we're looking at balancing caloric output, the calories we use, versus caloric intake, the calories we eat. The more you create that balance, the less body fat you have. So if somebody is skipping breakfast, if they're under eating during the day and then eating all their calories at the end of the day, they're actually reinforcing why our body makes body fat, to protect itself during the day when it doesn't have enough food coming in. And then when you eat at night, but it doesn't really have a lot to do at night because it's sitting on its butt doing nothing, it saves all those calories as body fat. Now, our body's not dumb in the sense that it continues to try to save more and more and more and more. So if you use 10 units of body fat during the day, it doesn't replace 10, it replaces 11, 12, 13. Just in case next time you use more than 10. Because you're underfeeding it, but you're active, it can't trust you. It doesn't have a clue what you're doing to it. It doesn't have a clue what it's going to need. So it protects itself by storing even more back. So again, if it uses 10 units of body fat during the day, it'll replace more than that every second, every chance it has. So understanding that if we're not tracking nutrition, then we're going to have a lot more fluctuations of that balance. We're not going to have a good balance between calories used versus calories eaten. So if we're not tracking nutrition, we're inconsistent with our nutrition, but we're active every day. We're doing the same routine pretty much every day. So we're going to have times where it's right, times where it's wrong. Every single time that it's wrong slows us down for progress. So a good podcast that you can listen to or have your clients listen to is podcast 1344. It's a nutrition podcast titled Balancing the Books. And that explains that kind of balance between calories coming in versus calories coming out. So that's the first thing I would do, is kind of explain how food relates for fat loss. Now, how does food relate to, kind of strength development is to get stronger. One of the components that people think of as strength is getting bigger muscles. That's true. The bigger muscle means there's more muscle fibers to create contractions that can move heavier things. So getting bigger muscles does help you get stronger over time. But strength itself more so comes from kind of neurological development, like improved communication between your brain and your muscles. In the sense that if you have 1,000 muscle fibers and your brain has, let's just say, 4 kind of nerve connections to those fibers, then it can talk to those fibers at the rate of whatever the 4 nerve connections can speak. So whatever their volume of communication they can handle. As you would train and you create the stimulus for more strength needed, the body is going to use protein, and just it has to have sufficient calorie intake, so other more important necessities like running its organs and its brain aren't in like high demand. They're being taken care of. So if you have protein and sufficient calories, the body says, hey, you know what? We need more strength out of that muscle. I need to communicate better to that muscle. Let me create now 5, 6, 7, 8 like lines of communication. So connections to the muscle. And therefore it can talk to it more. It can talk to more of the fibers. It can get greater degree of contraction. So for example, when we contract a muscle, we don't contract every single fiber at maximal strength. This is why we don't rip doors off their hinges, or when we give somebody a hug, we don't like break their back. One of the conditions I've worked with people, if they have cerebral palsy, if someone has cerebral palsy, they're going to have like nerve communication issues, and one of the side effects you'll see is they tend to be too forceful with their movements. So when they go to give you a hug, they actually would feel like they're going to pat you on the back, but like break your back. Or like I've done like strength training for people with cerebral palsy before, and there's no need to warm up a machine, if that makes sense. If you sit them down like an overhead press and you're like, hey, we're just going to do 50 pounds for 10 reps, then we'll go to 100 pounds, then we'll go to 120. Well, if you put a light weight on that thing, they're going to slam it right to the top and almost break the machine. So it's interesting, and I had to learn that, by the way. That's exactly what happened to me. But I learned how to train people with cerebral palsy and different nerve conditions, and it was very interesting. Very, 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 very cool learning experience. But that's how nutrition relates to strength, is you have to have sufficient calories and protein to make those neurological connections. Then how food relates to muscle tissue, and this would be like whether you're wanting to build muscle tissue or shape muscle tissue. Shaping is still building it in some areas, but not in other areas. Whereas, bodybuilding, you just want to build everything. Now, you're still going to do some shaping as you bodybuild, but you're trying for maximum growth, whereas often most clients are just looking for better shaping. So, with building muscle in certain areas, if you want to build new muscle tissue, you have to have new material. If I want to build a brick house, I have to have bricks. So you might have all the workers in the world, but if you don't have bricks, you don't have a brick house. You might have all the workouts in the world, but if you don't have protein, you don't have new muscle. So that's the first thing I do, is I explain how nutrition relates to their goals. This is important because I want them to have buy-in. I want them to understand why I would ask them to start tracking their nutrition, and help them understand that this is the missing link. Like, you absolutely need to have this. This is a non-negotiable, if that makes sense. So they're like, well, I don't want to track my food. Okay, but you might as well do nothing then, because you're not going to see anything. So like you have to do this. If I want to be in NASCAR, I have to drive a car. If I want to make body changes, I have to pay attention to my food. Then I further explain that training creates a stimulus for change, but nutrition is how our body meets that change. So training is important. You have to have the training if you want to create, increased strength, change of muscle shape. You have to have that stimulus for change, that reason for the body to change. But how it makes those changes is through nutrition. Then what I do is I start discussing different methods of tracking nutrition, whether they want to use a tracking app like MyFitnessPal or My Macros or all the 4 million other ones that are out there, whether they want to do that, or if I'm just like, you want me to just write you, 2 or 3 meals. I'll tell you the food, I'll tell you the serving sizes, and I'll give you 2 or 3 meals that you can have like for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a couple, like 2 or 3 ideas for snacks. And that's at least gets them started. I long-term hate that approach because they're going to need more than 2 or 3 options. They're just going to get bored of those foods, and or they're not going to have those foods available all the time. So then they're clueless as to what to do when those foods aren't available. But it's a good place to at least start. Get them started there, let them see some progress, get motivated, and then I kind of push them towards tracking. It's something where when you take the time to track your food, you start to learn what is in your foods, like what will get you the right protein you need, how do you control calories. And then once you learn that, you don't have to do it anymore. It just it becomes like intuitive. So I don't track my food, but I can tell you every day within probably 200 or 300 calories where my calories are at, and I eat like 4,000 plus calories a day. So I can tell you within a 10% window of where my calories are in my protein is. And that is enough to get me good results. So that's how I've gained over 120 pounds since I was in high school, but I'm actually leaner, 120 pounds heavier. Pretty awesome. But it was a crap ton of work. So, if you learn how to track it, you can then relax. And that's just the way it goes. Anytime we take on a new job, you have to operate within the systems. You then learn how the systems work, and then you kind of find your groove, and you're kind of going on your own. So it's just a normal process of any kind of new behavior or new activity, any new skill set, anything like that. So we'll talk through kind of what method they might prefer, and then we create guidelines that are not restrictive so much that you want them to be non-restrictive in the sense that somebody can do them, actually be able to meet the guidelines, and that it's sustainable. But you want it to be, controlled enough to actually see some progress. So sometimes if somebody's brand new to tracking calories, I might give them a 400 calorie window for the day, which is actually pretty big window. And then as they get better at that, we might narrow it to 300 and then down to 200. If for protein, I might say, hey, just get a minimum this. And then all of a sudden we start giving them a range where they would have a minimum and a maximum. And you might have, okay, at first I just want you to track all this per 24 hours. And then over time I start to help people control their distribution throughout the day to where we're breaking the day down into like 5 to 6 hour blocks. So there's the first 5 to 6 hours of being awake, they should have a certain amount of calories and protein. The second 5 to 6 hours of being awake, they should have another certain amount of calories and protein. The final 5 to 6 hours of being awake, the final amounts of their calorie and protein. So you kind of build it up over time. But you want to find a way in which they'll get buy-in, they'll start doing it, and even if they're frustrated or annoyed, they understand it's necessary, and you're just getting them started. And then I explain to them that this isn't going to be where we end. This is where we're starting. And then as you do well, as we build these good habits, we'll start to continue to refine the process as we go. The reason why I do that is to ensure that they know, if I'm starting them at some baseline of habits that are really broad-based guidelines, just because I need them to get started and to be able to feel successful, they need to know that that's not going to be tight enough, restrictive enough, controlled enough to actually see like long-term amazing results. It's going to get them results now. And then as that starts to plateau, we make more refinements to their guidelines. That gets them more results. We make more refinements. That gets them more results. So it's a process. You need them to know that it's a process. So when should they start seeing results if they're not tracking their food? My answer would be I have no freaking clue. Likely if you're going to do, if you're eating highs and lows, so now all of a sudden you're training more consistently, you're probably going to lose some body fat. You're probably going to gain a little bit of strength and some muscle compared to what you're doing before. But I have absolutely no clue to what degree of result you're going to get or how fast that is going to happen, because it's dependent on your nutrition. If we don't know what we're doing with nutrition, we don't know what we're getting from our training. That's just how it works. So that's the process I go through. Sometimes you can go through that in 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes what feels like days. It just kind of depends on, how open the person is to doing new things, how resistant they are to the tracking aspects. Maybe they have a lot of preconceived ideas for nutrition. Oh, those are tough ones. They'll have read a bunch of articles, maybe they tried some other things, and it's like, oh, dang, I have to unteach you that and then teach you the right stuff, which is a little more work. But the reward is well worth it. It's such an amazing job that when you can help somebody finally see results of their efforts and you see them just happier in life, man, that's such an awesome, good feeling. So that's the process that we would go through for somebody if they are training and exercising, but they're not paying attention to their nutrition. So they're not tracking it. The next question we had was, how would you answer that question, of when should I see results for a client who's only eating 1,200 calories a day and working out like crazy? Well, we'd actually go through the exact same thing. So I would explain to them how food works in relation to fat loss, strength development, and muscle mass and shaping. So we already went through that. And then I would explain to them that training is the stimulus for change. Nutrition is how the change is met. So essentially what this person's doing is they have all the workers in the world. So if you say, I want to build a house, you want to build your body, right? Okay. They have 1,000 workers, but they have no bricks. What are the workers doing? They're sitting around, right? They're just going to sit there and BS, and they don't have anything to do. There's no bricks. You can pay the workers, and you can have, 100, 1,000, 10,000, a million workers. But if there's zero bricks, there's zero progress. And essentially what you're wanting to get across to them is that 1,200 calories a day is like having no bricks. Now, if you listen to podcast 1232, Nutrition titled Start Here, that podcast, it does explain what the calorie ranges should be and how to kind of decide where some of these calories should be based on their body weight and their activity. So it gives you that. So go listen to that. And then we also have podcast number 1099. It's a nutrition podcast titled How to Increase Calories If You've Been Under Eating. Really helpful, very helpful. You're going to want to know that information if somebody's coming at you, with only eating 1,200 calories a day and they're working out like crazy. You're going to want to know that. So you're going to have to basically help them rebuild their food, rebuild their metabolism. I've worked with so many females, I can't tell you, to where they were over-exercising, under-eating, very unhealthy, weren't having menstrual cycles, weren't having a period at all. And we were working together, and it might take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and all of a sudden they started having their period again. So their body was so underfed and so just just malnourished that they weren't hormonally healthy. So that's something you will see with a lot of females is, if they're premenopausal, they're going to not have their period if they're too underfed. And they're going to have a lot of bloating. They're going to have a lot of water retention. There's just going to be a lot of issues that are coming aesthetically that need to be solved only through proper nutrition and getting their body back to a healthy state. So that's something, I've seen, hundreds of times over. But essentially what you're going to want to get across to the person is that food is their friend. And that's hard to understand, especially because I know what it felt like whenever I was restrictive eating is food. I felt like food made me fat. I was like, I'm fat because I ate too much because I'm mentally weak and a lazy piece of crap. That's the way I talk to myself, which is not very nice. I've had to learn to undo that. But food, to me, was the enemy. I'm not going to eat anything because that stuff made me fat. That, I hate myself for not having control over that, so I'm just not going to eat it at all. And unfortunately, that's detrimental. That's horribly detrimental. So we have to learn that food is a friend. Food is it's something that's a power for us. It's a tool. It's can't really think of the right word. I'm missing kind of the word I want to have. But it's something that we have to harness and understand how to use. You can't go all or nothing on food. You can't go, I'm either going to eat everything or I'm going to eat nothing. Neither one of those are good. Now, they're not good for different reasons, but neither one are good. Neither one are the right answer. Neither one are going to allow you to have the body you want, the energy you want, the way you might want to look, how you feel throughout the day, that kind of stuff. So food is our friend. Food is something that if we learn how to use it properly, we can actually build the body that we want. So we're not trying to starve the body. We're not trying to rip the body apart. We're trying to build the body. We have to actually nurture our body. We have to, like growing a plant. You have to feed it and water it every day, right? So our body needs to be tended to like you would tend to a plant. Food is our friend. And that's kind of the biggest thing I would try to get across to a client who is under eating and over exercising. They're overvaluing the significance of the training, and they're undervaluing the significance of their nutrition. They think that training is making the change, and that is not true. Absolutely 100% not true. Podcast 1321 is a training podcast titled Your Training Progress is Dependent on Your Nutrition. 100% true there, that what your nutrition is will determine what your training outcome is. So trainers and your clients, have them listen to podcast 1321, which is a training podcast titled Your Training Progress is Dependent on Your Nutrition. So we need this person, the client in this position, to understand that restrictive eating isn't beneficial. And out-exercising their caloric intake is not beneficial. And again, it goes back to that podcast we talked about, balancing the books, is their body is going to actually be more determined to hold on to body fat. So when I've worked with clients who are anorexic and bulimic, but a lot of the anorexic ones, I've worked with people like who had hospital stays because of how anorexic they were, and their organs were almost going to shut down, and they had a lot of issues. And we've talked through that. So I've had a psychologist who worked with people with eating disorders. We connected, and we still work together nowadays with, like, if they have a patient who needs more nutrition education and wants an outlet of exercise, we work together to try to do nutrition education, and then how to turn some of that OCD kind of obsessive compulsive behavior towards exercise, not nutrition. And what we go through is just like you'll see is they've restricted their calories so much that their body has ate away pretty much all muscle tissue, but they still have these pockets of fat on the inside of their thighs, or in like their armpit area, like around the breast tissue, like the breast. And you'll see, and if it's males, you'll still have like body fat in the inner thighs. You'll have like body fat in like small little pockets in different areas. And they're just like, I can't get rid of this fat. I can't get rid of this fat. And I remember I had one client, they were under 18, and their parents were in the room with me, and the client asked, they said, basically they said is like, I'm fat, and I have fat on my body, and I want to get it off. And the parents had told him, like, no, you're not. You're skinny. You're fine. You look great. And I remember, like, whenever the client said that to me, they're like, well, I have fat on my body. I said, yeah, you do. And I remember, like, the mom wanted to, like, jump across the table and, like, kill me. But the person, like, the under 18 client who I ended up working with, they weren't insane. Like they're not seeing things. They're not making stuff up. They did have pockets of fat on their outer thighs, pockets of fat on their inner thighs, and everything felt flabby and loose. And it was because they were so malnourished, their body ate away a bunch of muscle. The muscles weren't filled up with glycogen, so they were like you could flex them and they would feel like firm. The person was just so underfed. But telling them they don't have fat on them when they clearly do is not going to help them. They're not crazy. They can see it. So telling them, yes, you do have it. I then went on to explain, and this is all a very shortened version, was you've tried this method of eating nothing and exercising, and that fat has just stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed while you lost a bunch of muscle and you feel miserable all the time. You have no energy. You're sleeping all the time. You feel like crap. And it hasn't worked, and it's not going to. So you've done it for long enough that if it were to work, it would have. And then I actually talked to her about how I get people ready for competitions when they step on stage and they don't have any fat in those areas. How those diets only take 16 to 20 weeks, depending on the condition the person was in. Might take a little bit longer, maybe 24, maybe 30 weeks. Maybe it takes 6 months. But in 6 months or less, people can get down to 0% body fat, basically, like where you can't see anybody. They definitely have body fat, so it's not zero. But where this person is struggling having pockets of fat, the person on stage does not have the fat. And I said, so if you've been doing this for longer than 6 months, clearly what you're doing doesn't work. But what this is doing does work. So I want to teach you what that person did to get on stage with no body fat, but yet they still have muscle, they still have energy, they still feel good. So the method you're trying actually built an insane amount of willpower, very good discipline. Holy freaking crap. Some of the people I've worked with anorexic backgrounds are some of the most disciplined and willpower strong, mentally strong people you ever meet in your life. But we just have to redirect that. So we want to put that to a healthier way. So it's basically showing them that the method you're using, what you're doing, isn't making results. But this method over here does. So when you're talking to a client who eats only 1,200 calories a day and works out like crazy, say, what do you want to look like? Like, what are you doing that for? And let's say, for example, they want to look like somebody who wants to get on stage. I'll say, well, why don't we just look at what those people do? So what does somebody do when they get on stage? Well, they don't eat 1,200 calories a day and work out like crazy. They have to balance their calorie input, like their intake, to their calorie output. So maybe they're eating 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 calories. And they're training 4 days a week with maybe some light cardio on 2 of the other days. So you have to start to explain that. What outcome do you want? Let's look at other people who successfully achieve that outcome, and how does what they do look different than what you do? And then we start pushing them towards that. And that's going to get them help and see them progress and basically get more, like we said, buy-in, is because if they see that you understand them. So seek first to understand before being understood. Understand them, listen to them, ask them questions, get an idea of what they're doing it for. And then start to redirect that effort towards something that's actually going to help them and get them the progress that they want. So when should they see results? If they're eating 1,200 calories a day and working out like crazy, they won't. They're going to see absolutely nothing. They're likely to see no changes, become frustrated, quit, and then jump to the next physical fitness, thing that they do. So it's important to teach them that food is their friend, what role food plays in their goal, and then to walk them up slowly back to eating healthy amounts. So again, how do you get them back to eating proper amounts? Podcast 1099, nutrition podcast titled How to Increase Calories If You've Been Under Eating. So it'll be a great podcast to check out. Okay. Well, I hope that this was helpful to any trainer that listens to this and anybody who is experiencing this themselves. Listen to all the podcasts I talked about. Again, podcast 1232, nutrition, titled Start Here. That's a really good one because it gives you all the steps that I would normally take somebody through. Okay, well, if you have any questions or if you ever need to reach out, I'm always available. I'm always happy to help. Cool. Well, our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. That'd probably be good to tell you that. So if you like today's podcast or podcast in general, please consider sharing it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people can help. That's the whole goal. So if you can share it on social media, that reaches the most amount of people. If you just share it in a conversation with a friend, just anytime you hear somebody asking questions about nutrition or training, make sure you send them our way. The podcast is intended to help people every single day. That's why I take an hour to do it every day. I love doing it, and why we keep it for free is so we can help people live their healthiest and happiest lives. Now, also, thank you to the patrons of the podcast, people who financially support the podcast. You are the reason why we can keep this for free. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day. And without donations, that makes even less business sense to devote this much time and money to it. But I really love the idea of the podcast, and I want to keep doing it as long as I can. So thank you very much for your donations. It really, really, really helps. If you do want to donate, you can go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com. We have options there for one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything you give at this point right now, we don't make any profit off this. It's just going to go right to that hosting cost. So it'll help basically just curb some of the loss. So I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Also, if you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.